not intending to actually slap 25% tariffs on his neighbours. He wanted them to be scared into thinking he was, so they do a deal to do something quite significant that he could claim was a victory in one of his election pledges, in this case, securing the southern border. And that's what he appears to have got already out of Mexico. Now, why don't other people see this? I just see people immediately going into the old hysteria of 2016 to 2020, where every single thing Trump did led to mass hysteria, rather than understanding a little bit better the character of the guy. He's a deal maker. That's what he does. He's a trader. He's a transactional president who just basically says, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. And you know what? It looks like it's worked. Now, am I wrong?
No, you're not, and it kills me to say that. But the reality, look, Piers, I was in Davos, and the standard rubric phrase that people use is, look at what he does, not what he says.
Yeah.
He's a transactional deal maker, etc., etc. But the speed with which he has acted on so many other things in the United States, domestic policy, all the things you've been talking about, has led people to pause and think, well, maybe he's not just bluffing as a deal maker. And I think there's some valid justification. If we take the Colombia incident, now here we had the flights, the rejection, the threat, the capitulation. So there is some justification for people saying, hang on, maybe he really does mean these threats in this way with the force of destruction that they would bring. And I'll go one bit further, because to take your argument, which is he's a deal maker, transactional, etc., then President Sheinbaum of Mexico had 10,000 troops in her back pocket that she was waiting and ready to offer up as necessary. When you start playing this will he, won't he, is it that way? Is it the game theory? You're in very...
And now in politics, he sees everything as negotiable. And by the way, I kind of agree with him. And in terms of the volume of stuff pouring out of the White House, a lot of people think it's chaotic and so on and ill thought through and so on. I don't really agree. I think he spent 4 years systematically planning and plotting to hit the ground, if he got back in, unbelievably hard. And I think that's what we're seeing. And no, I might be wrong, but I do believe that.
Okay, look, Piers, the system, and you can debate this amongst yourselves to your heart's content, but the system is not designed and cannot cope with this much going through it without having severe disruption and unintended consequences. Now, that might be fine for those that want it like that. And that's not my position. It's not for me to take a position. But in the case of tariffs, is it okay? And the other thing is it really good to have the Canadian Prime Minister, soon to be ex, standing in front of his people saying, hey, we thought we were friends. This is not how you treat allies. Because in that scenario, fine, you won your deal. But what's your long-term damage?
Yeah, but you know what? I think I watched Trudeau sniffling and snivelling like he normally does. You know, he'll go down as one of the wokest leaders of the country in the history of mankind. He wouldn't even allow me to say that phrase. He famously said to a bunch of students when they said, you know, mankind, one small step for mankind, it's one step for people kind, we say in Canada. It's like he was ludicrous and ends up incredibly unpopular. He's on his way out. So for him to stand there and try and belatedly go out on a high whacking Trump, I'm like, I wonder what most Canadians are thinking. Because Trudeau's incredibly unpopular now. I reckon, Richard, I reckon a lot of Canadians will be thinking, like a lot of Brits are now thinking, well, we have a pretty weak, you know, pretty socialist left-wing government now. It's incredibly unpopular very quickly. I reckon a lot of them are thinking, I wish we had a bit of this action going on. It may not all be right, but my God, there's a kind of vim and vigour to it all.
Yes, I agree with you. God, this is getting deeply distressing for me. Twice in one evening. Yes, I think there is a section in Europe, look in Germany, look in the UK, that is saying, hang on, why are they getting so much from their leaders and we're getting non-stuff and nonsense? But I worry about the long-term animus. If you think about it, Colombia, South Africa, all the aid policies, the EU, the UK, Canada, Mexico, if these are your allies and that's how you treat them, I'd hate to see how you treat your enemies.
Yeah, but I think a bit of tough love. Let's bring Cenk Uygur in here. maybe it's because I know Trump so well. You know, I've read all his books and I know how he operates. I know how he thinks. I know how he works, even though he can be, even to people who know him very well, very unpredictable. But I've watched all this tariff thing go down. You know, I'm going to do 60% tariffs on China. No, he's not. But what he wants China to think is there's a leader in town who's not going to take any crap from us. And someone who for 30 years has banged on about how China's been ripping off America. So we better take him more seriously than we've had to take Joe Biden, who didn't know what day it was. And I do think part of Trump's thinking and strategy in this sort of ferocious first couple of weeks is to send the message, America's woken up and you better all get used to it very quickly.
Yeah, look, as usual, I'm going to give a balanced answer here because that's the correct answer. But first, if you think the Canadians love this, you're totally wrong. They booed the American national anthem in a hockey game.
A few of them did.
Because they're really, yeah.
Well, let's take a look.
Okay. I mean,
let's take a look. Look, there's a massive stadium.
Like a neocon.
Well, hang on. No, you said they all booed him.
Can
Let's play the clip. Let's play the evidence. For
they
the
did.
Viewers. Let's hear the airport the other day by a bunch of pro-Palestinians who recognised me. They were sort of semi-laughing as they did it.
Okay.
So, look, I don't think this was Canada rejecting Trump. I do think there are a lot of people in Canada, just what I'm seeing on social media, who actually think, you know what, Trudeau, you've had your chance, you blew it, and actually we get this. It's called strong leadership.
Okay, so far I've talked 5 seconds, but thank you for proving my point. They did definitely boo, and if you got booed louder, that's kind of on you. So this neocon idea of if we attack them, they'll love us is ridiculous. No, they don't love us. Now, you say also, hey, Trump's been planning for 4 years. But when people said, hey, they're planning to do this Project 2025 for 4 years, the right wing flipped out and said, no way, that's not going to happen. No way, he's not planning at all. And then he gets in office and he's doing it pretty much exactly like Project 2025 said. In fact, he put the author of Project 2025 as the head of the Office of Management and Budget. And so they've done some things that I think are terrible, cutting U.S. aid. Now, all of a sudden, the donors are in charge of the Treasury, one of the worst ideas I've ever heard. Now, having said that, I understand what's going on with the tariffs.
Do you mean Elon
He's
Musk?
Bluffing.
Do you mean Musk?
Oh, I mean Musk, and apparently a whole army of Silicon Valley CEOs have now been empowered
you know what?
to access all of the money of the American taxpayers.
I love it. You know why?
Okay, well, that's because...
Well, no,
right,
to Richard's... No, check, let me explain. To Richard's point...
Because that's a terrible idea.
No, I like it,
hey,
but
you know what, Piers? Let's put George Soros in charge.
Let me explain.
Let's give George Soros the key to the Treasury.
Let me explain.
Because that's the same thing.
Let me explain.
Oh, donors are great if they're on my side. No, I hate the idea.
It's not about whose side they're on.
Oligarchy to the max.
All right, let me
explain.
You haven't
let me get to the part about the tariffs.
Can I jump in? Let me explain what I mean. To Richard's point, yeah, I actually quite like dismantling the status quo of how governments have operated in America for many, many decades. I think it's been largely to the detriment of the American people. So if you get a super brain like Elon Musk, who's a flawed character, don't get me wrong, but he's also got a super brain, gigantic sized brain. You know, for example, in the UK, the National Health Service was a great treasured thing, which we all loved, and we still love the principle of it. But it is literally creaking at the seams and falling apart because a big population now, it can't cope with it. I would love to have a brain like Elon Musk getting stuck into the spending on the NHS and restore it to glory, as he's done to every one of his businesses. So I don't really agree with you. I quite like the idea of these guys ripping into American federal overspending. Why not? And by the way, the American people seem to as well. So they're loving all this.
Piers. Yeah, they're loving it until they find a couple of $1 trillion missing. And then they're going to go, oh, he had a big brain, but he didn't use it for us. He used it for himself. So you guys are asking us, and by the way, this is the least populous position on planet Earth. Trust the big brain billionaires. You know who else has a big brain? And the right wing would agree. George Soros, not only one of the greatest investors of all time, but according to the right wing, has manipulated the American government to totally work for him for decades. If that's true, he has a giant brain. Should we put him in charge of the Treasury? No, because just because you're smart, if that's even true, doesn't necessarily mean that we should give you the keys to the kingdom. That is controlling all of the taxpayer money. If they do something on their own behalf, which is a near guarantee, you're telling me all the Silicon Valley CEOs are angels and they would never do
No, of
anything
course
for
not.
their own behalf. They only have pure intentions for the American people. I'd love to see that.
The last
But
time I
back to
checked,
the
America's
tariffs,
what,
and it relates to the same
$17
thing.
trillion in debt? I mean, let's be honest, the conventional way of doing this hasn't been great, has it?
But Piers, I'm against the conventional way of doing it. So you're barking up the wrong tree there. Look, the tariffs are a good example because Trump is clearly bluffing. But at some point, as I think I said on this show
clearly
earlier,
working too.
that bluff is going to get called. Yeah. So and by the way, I defended him on Colombia because the Colombian president was wrong. He changed his position mid-flight. His position was indefensible. On the other hand, with Canada and Mexico, Trump is starting this over what I think is nonsensical claims. I know fentanyl's coming in, but the real problem is demand. It's not supply. We've tried this 1,000 times, right? So now we've started a giant trade war because his bluff got called. Now the question is he going to adjust? And at some point, which he does quite often,
of course,
go, hey, you know what? I got a small concession out of them, and I'm going to claim that that's a giant concession. It was a big win, and then he turns around and calls it off. No problem. But if he keeps digging and digging, and we have an extended trade war with Canada, Mexico, and China, then it's going to turn into a disaster.
He won't do
spiral.
that because
but
ultimately
I hope he doesn't do that.
He won't do that because Natalie, ultimately, Trump likes to be judged on the performance of the economy. I mean, it's the thing. He's a billionaire. He's built himself into a billionaire because he pays attention to the economy and he likes to be. I mean, I always felt with him, he went slightly mad in that last year in his first term because the pandemic wrecked the economy. He just couldn't handle it because to him, this is the holy grail being destroyed, and he got into pretty good shape. He's transactional. He does do deals. I think the Mexico thing today is a classic example of Trump actually at his best for the American people because ultimately what's happened? The trade war didn't start. It's been delayed, and 10,000 more troops from Mexico are being put straight on that southern border. No one can tell me that is not going to help in the war on fentanyl or illegal immigrants pouring through the border. I mean, obviously it's going to help. So therefore, Trump is delivering on one of his promises. People may not agree with that, but that's why he won big.
I reject the premise that this is a trade war that President Trump started. There's decades of abuses against American workers, against the American economy that has occurred at the hands of all of these countries, whether it's China and intellectual property theft, Mexico and the depletion and absolute degradation of American workers' wages through illegal immigration, which they have helped facilitate. We can already see they had, 10,000 troops waiting on reserve. Why didn't they deploy them earlier? But look, the mainstream media is completely taking the bait on this, okay? The same people, who we sat by for 4 years who cared absolutely zero about American consumers, American workers. They didn't even care to cover inflation. They lied about it. They lied about what Joe Biden was doing to the economy. Now, all of a sudden, the only thing that they can pretend to care about is putting American workers first in American consumers' pocketbooks because apparently tariffs, they're going to be stuck paying the cost. In reality, all of these Chamber of Commerce talking heads, these corporate media outlets are on the payroll of this sort of, I think, rules-based international order, the same international order that Marco Rubio called out in his confirmation hearings that we don't have to sit through anymore. And I think President Trump represents an actual ability to stand up to that. And you know what? I'm sorry, the United States is an economic hegemon. We don't have to sit back and negotiate like losers. We have economic power, and we can use that to bring about wins in a myriad of sectors, in a myriad of ways. And what you're seeing today is the United States actually using that economic power to score wins on immigration. And again, like I said, I just reject the framing that the trade war was started by President Trump. The Chinese Communist Party has been abusing and manipulating American workers for so long. And by the way, these are the same people who've been championing the de-dollarization of the entire world, of the United States of America, of the United States dollar. So spare me the performative activism about caring about American workers and consumers.
Richard, you've been like a coiled cobra ready to spring throughout what Natalie just said. So spring away.
Well, I'm not here to defend the entire mainstream media, but I will say after 40 years of covering inflation, I think I do understand perhaps arguably a little bit more about it than most people, and certainly the measures of the last inflation. You see, Natalie, you forget that yes, the United States had inflation, but so did every other G7 and G20 country, and the inflation levels were the same pretty much across all of them. So it is not a uniquely American prospect for whatever the reason. I'm just giving you the facts. But the more important fact is This idea that somehow tariffs are not inflationary. I heard Howard Lutnick's confirmation hearing. I don't know where Howard has sort of changed his economic theories, but the Peterson Institute, just about everybody agrees that there will be an inflationary effect of tariffs. It is an economics 101. The issue, Natalie, is not whether there will be an inflationary impact. It is how big and how much people are prepared to withstand that. And that inflationary effect goes both sides. Now, I'll take your political points because I'm not qualified to answer them. But on the economic point, I think you're going to have to accept that there is an inflationary aspect.
Is it also true, Richard? I mean, this is not even a political point. It's more of a performance marketing point, if you like.
Yeah.
That Joe Biden's running of the economy or the running of the economy in his premiership actually wasn't that bad. The problem was he was woefully useless at communicating how well it was doing. And Trump has come in, inherited a pretty good economy, actually. But because he's able to beat his chest like a 20-ton gorilla about it, the impression the public are getting is, wow, everything's changed in 2 weeks. Well, you and I know the economy can't change like that in 2 weeks. What's happened is the ability of the guy at the top to sell it.
Completely. Absolutely. The US is the best performing economy at the moment amongst all the major economies, period. Largely because of the Biden policies, the Fed's policies, the way things were structured, the inability of other countries to have anything like the dynamism of this US economy. It is by far the most exciting, vibrant, free economy in the world, period. So yes, the US economy did not need massive help in a sense. But I'll take Natalie's point. Yes, there are structural imbalances on trade that needed to be addressed. There are long-term infrastructure issues that need to be addressed, as indeed do they need to be in Germany. But the US is way further ahead than any EU country at dealing with all these things at the moment.
I mean, I remember interviewing Trump, I think, for the first time in about 2008. And he spent a lot of that interview banging on about China ripping off America. So this has been a thing. This isn't something new since he became a politician. He's been doing this for a long time. And actually, he's not wrong. Let me just switch gears to the plane crash. Cheng, let me start with you here.
Well, Piers, I can't let you get away with saying that Joe Biden handled the economy extremely well.
No, I actually rephrased it, Natalie. Hang on, Natalie. Hang on. Don't misquote me. I rephrased. I said the economy under his premiership. In other words, I took it away from him personally because I don't think he knew what day it was. But I do think the economy wasn't down to him because I don't think he knew what day it was. However, the truth is the economy was not performing badly comparative to most other of the wealthy countries in the world. In fact, the opposite. The problem was none of them knew how to sell a story to the public that was convincing, whereas Trump knows exactly how to do that.
I think the dozens of revisions about job employment numbers showing that actually I think most of them went to non-citizens, and I believe it was dozens of revisions downwards, suggest otherwise. But I think most importantly, Piers, any presidential administration that oversaw an invasion of upwards of 10 to 15 million illegal aliens into this country, that is probably the single largest detrimental force to American workers' wages. So I don't think that you can say that that's a strong economy that Joe Biden created by allowing the most impactful.
Well, that's a separate. Yeah, but that's a hang on. That's a separate. That's a separate.
It's not a separate issue.
Well, it is because
inextricably linked to the economy.
It is in a sense that's a separate story on which I agree with you. I think what happened at the southern border under Biden was lamentable. And the fact that they then picked Kamala Harris to take over from him in this weird coronation, despite knowing she was literally told she was the border czar. Then they had to lie about her being called the border czar. Then we had to show a million clips of people on MSNBC calling her the border czar. And of course, the truth is that once people knew, well, she was the one in charge of that and look how terrible it was, she was kind of dead in the water, I thought, from that moment. Never mind anything else. Anyway, look, I want to turn to the plane crash. Cheng, I want to play a clip of President Trump talking about the appalling plane crash in Washington.
Point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so.
I've got to be honest, Cenk, before you respond to that, I did not like that. I didn't like that. I just felt like there's a time and a place to do that kind of stuff, and it's not in the immediate aftermath of a terrible crash with so many people killed, and before you really know anything about what's happened. Now, it may well turn out, as often with Trump, that a lot of the stuff he's talking about, in some way, that there will be merit to the argument. But I just felt the timing, to me, was wrong. That if you're president of the United States and 60-odd people plus the people on board the helicopter, if they've all died in a horrific crash, actually your job in that moment is to be comforter-in-chief, not blamer-in-chief.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. First off, yes, I know the program that he's referring to, and it doesn't help our side to deny reality. So there was a terrible DEI or diversity program about a decade ago, and it did absurd things like give you extra points if science was your worst class, right? So it was absurd. But that's been gone for over a decade now. And coming right out of the crash, when you start blaming DEI, what you're saying to your base is, oh, I'm not going to look into what went wrong here. Was it the plane? Was it the helicopter? Why was it the miscommunication? Overstaffing, understaffing. Obviously, overstaffing is not an issue, but understaffing, et cetera, right? You're coming out and going, minorities did it. And that's a terrible look. And, you know, you could say, hey, you know what, Cenk, you just told us that there were some DEI abuses. That's right. And that's part of why they won the election. But if you then swing the pendulum so far that you blame minorities after every single incident, which is basically what looks like it's happening right now, you're going to turn off the country. You certainly turned me off. So, and then they realize, oh, wait, black voters are coming towards us, so that's a bad idea. So Jesse Waters goes on Fox News and goes, well, okay, it wasn't black people. It was dwarves, the deaf, and transgender people. You didn't even investigate anything yet, and you're blaming dwarves? It's absurd, and it's going to have the pendulum swing back against you, and the American people are going to go, I'm tired of you blaming minorities and women and dwarves for everything. This is absurd.
Okay, Natalie?
Well, look, I think that the American people have gotten tired of the inability to be able to just call a spade, which is that prioritizing the hiring of people. Sure, maybe it was 10 years ago, but the Obama administration directly changed in 2013 the FAA hiring procedures to shift away from actual merit-based standardized testing, accredited institutions, to favor more, cushy biodata metrics because people grew up in a difficult household or had a certain skin color. And you know what? There's lasting ramifications from that. And I think for so long, the American people have been called out as racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever for calling it out. But in reality, that's what the status quo is in terms of who people are hiring. And to say that people can't call it out for what it is, I think is just a continual version of that gaslight. There's serious issues going on. And I think that in industries like the FAA, things that have absolutely nothing to do with identity or anything related to ad hominem attacks on people, that the American people are tired. And that's why people elected President Trump, because he calls it out for what it is. I mean, this is not just run-of-the-mill DEI. This is hiring dwarves and transgender people to direct airplanes. That is nonsensical.
All right, Richard.
Whoa. Natalie, I have a question for you, right? I have a question for you. Do you, forgive me, Piers,
Sure.
but
No, please.
I know a thing or two about doing this. Do you believe that any of those people, the mentally challenged, the dwarfs, any of those people that were substandard, in his view, were being employed under that policy for the purpose of being an air traffic controller? Not an administrator, not an assistant.
The fact that you can even ask me a question if the United States is hiring dwarves and mentally challenged people to direct air traffic, I think sort of proves that we're in a bit of a sticky situation.
No, with respect,
obviously, they're still investigating it. But what I'm saying is that if the hiring process has been shifted not to be merit-based, then yeah, I think that's worth looking into, and I think we should investigate it. But I can still call it out for what it is. There's still systemic issues going on with FAA hiring policies and procedures. If the fact that you can actually ask me if a dwarf would have been in the control tower. I don't know. People who are mentally challenged, they're probably not capable of doing that job. So I would like to live in a country where you don't have to worry about those people being in a control tower and you can't even ask me a question like that.
Okay. Except when you are looking at a plane crash, the normal standard of doing this is you say, let us find the facts first. Now, with respect, I do have some more experience of this than most people. I've covered every major plane crash since Lockerbie. And Piers, you'll remember, of course, MH370.
My last 7 weeks on air at CNN, when I was your colleague, every night we did the missing plane, and you were my go-to expert.
You put in the domain those areas that maybe the public needed to think about, i.e. air traffic control, complexity, Reagan National, the flight paths. What you don't do is speculate. Rampant speculation. And that's what the president did. And to use his exact words, I have some thoughts and opinions on this. That, by any standard, is what you don't do. You let the NTSB, as indeed we heard from the NTSB, we heard from her, the chair, say, let us get on with this. But no, he put in the domain a load of stuff that may be relevant in the future, but it's not the position of the president to say, hey, let's have a speculation game.
I mean, it's interesting because...
That's my problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, going back to the missing plane back in 2014, when CNN went wall to wall on this story about what had happened to this plane, and you and I were together every night debating, we did a lot of speculating. I mean, let's be honest, we had a lot of people on who just speculated. Nobody knew what the hell had happened to this thing. We were blaming anyone we could think of each night, trying to make the story. I mean, I felt that we were just trying to string the story out as much as we could because it was doing big ratings. But there was a lot of speculation going on. I think the question I had...
Inappropriate speculation in many cases.
Yeah, but my point is the media do that a lot, I think, on these plane stories. What Trump was doing, I mean, it's whether the President of the United States should be doing it and whether he should be airing theories which may in the end turn out to be completely lacking in any connection to what happened here. We just don't know yet. I think that's a valid point. But I think that he would probably say, look, every time there's one of these things happening, I turn on the media and there's everyone just speculating. Why shouldn't I? And, you know, people will nod away and go, he's got a point.
You know the answer to that because he is the head of the executive. He's the head of the assistant. He is supposed to follow the gold standard, if you will. And the gold standard is investigators are... Otherwise, the NTSB chair would do the same, and she didn't.
I would also point out President Trump said these comments while giving a press briefing in the James Brady press briefing room. It wasn't like he was saying it in a capacity where he couldn't be challenged.
No, but let me ask you, Natalie. Natalie, let me ask you this. Natalie, let me ask you this. I felt for the first half of it, he was absolutely on point and he said all the right things. But if you were, for example, if you knew somebody on the plane or the helicopter, a family member, a friend, a work colleague, whoever it may be, how would you honestly have felt? Just be honest about what he then went into the line he then took, where he was just airing, having a go at Biden, having a go at Obama, having a go about DEI, all these things. I mean, I don't know about you, but I just felt on a human level, my criticism would have been wrong timing. Just don't do it there. Not the first time the president talks about it.
I think I would have been infinitely more upset and more critical of the FAA and hiring policies and procedures that allowed for that crash to happen.
Yeah, but you don't actually. But that's the point.
You
Natalie,
don't know that.
Yeah, but hang on, Natalie. You don't. Yeah, here's the point, Natalie. You have no idea why that crash happened. None of us do. So when you say that, you're justifying what President Trump did, but you don't know any more than he did in that moment about what's happened here. We just have no idea. It could have been anything.
He did not directly outright blame it on DEI in the same way that when he talked about COVID origin.
Go back and read the transcript. Go back.
Yeah, he did.
Go back and read the transcript.
Factors. Decades of hiring unqualified people or less qualified people is going to to less qualified people running, as they
but if
call
I'd
them,
been him, if I'd been him, honestly, Cenk, if I'd been President Trump, if I had already found out, and I don't know if he knew this in the moment or not, if I had found out that, for example, in that air traffic control room, normally at that time of night, there is somebody managing the helicopters and somebody managing the planes. And in that particular moment on that night, one person was doing both jobs. That fact alone, and I'll come to Richard for your more expert view of that, but that fact alone raises massive alarm bells, and it plays to the general agreed feeling about this from all sides that air traffic control is under real pressure in terms of staffing. So, and that, it seems to me, might well turn out to be the most likely thing here, rather than DEI, which is a separate issue. I mean, I honestly, I hate DEI. I think it's become an awful thing that has been misused, mischaracterized, and actually abused in a way which has promoted mediocrity over meritocracy, and I hate that. So just for the record, DEI sucks, just generally as a concept, I think. However, there's no evidence DEI played any part here, but there is clear evidence now emerging of understaffing and potentially critical understaffing, where one person was doing two jobs on a busy night.
And that's exactly what happened.
So,
in a sense. Okay,
Right, Richard, I'll come to you in one sec. Just get Cenk to respond to that.
Yeah. So listen, as we speculate as to what is more likely, I have dwarves as less likely. I have understaffing as far, far, far more likely. And so what happened here is that Congress, by the way, and almost no one's talking about this, and I'll tell you why in a second, ordered 50 more routes at an already incredibly crowded airway at Reagan National Airport. And that's because they wanted direct flights back to their states and districts, and let's be honest, probably their donors. So did they then increase the air traffic controllers at Reagan? No, they refused to fund that. But they said, you have to give us our direct flights. So that's the first place I would look for as to what went wrong, because we definitely had understaffing. And if I'm a family member of someone who died, and someone's doing nonsense talk about dwarves and transgender people, instead of trying to figure out why my family member died and to make sure that we prevent that from happening again, I would be furious. But why don't people talk about that? Well, because Republican and Democratic politicians voted that way. So it's not easy to say it's Trump's fault, it's DEI's fault, so it doesn't fall into the normal political and cultural wars. And one last thing on this, Piers. Look, Trump's greatest strength and weakness is the same thing, marketing. So when we were talking about earlier, he comes in, it's the same economy, he pretends that it changed overnight and went from terrible to amazing, but he beats his chest and marketing, and it works. And the Democrats never, ever defend themselves, can't make their case if their life depended. But on the other hand, Trump always takes it too far. And so here he comes in and goes, oh, all these people died. It's a great advantage to use my talking points against DEI. No, it isn't, brother. And it's really sad for those families and disturbing that you're using them for a political tactic. And it's really
would actually be
terrible.
It would be genuinely hilarious if it turned out you were Donald Trump's brother, just for the record. Let me bring Richard in here. Richard, I mean, I think the most likely, I mean, look, again, we're speculating, of course we are. We're doing exactly what we said Trump shouldn't do, but we are different to Trump. We're allowed to speculate, we're the media. It does seem to me that the staff shortages